Okay, so storytelling for social media. In a village in Staffordshire, UK in 2001, a girl wrote a message on a red helium balloon. Please return to Laura Buxton. And on one side she wrote her name, and on the other side she wrote her address. Where would this balloon land? In a lake? In a tree? In a car park? Who knows? A man found it in his hedge 140 miles away in Wiltshire. He was worried that his cows might eat the balloon and be choked by it. So he read the message, took the balloon to the 10-year-old girl next door. Her name was Laura Buxton. The balloon had travelled over 140 miles from Laura Buxton to another Laura Buxton. But this coincidence was just the beginning of an incredible story. Laura sent Laura a letter suggesting they should meet. When they got together, they were surprised at how similar they looked. They both had brown hair. They both wore it the same way. They both wore their brown hair the same way, and they both had pink jumpers and blue jeans. They had each, unbeknownst to each other, brought along a pet guinea pig that they had on their laps. They were both brown, and they both had little patches on the ends of their tails. Waiting at home, they each had a 3-year-old black Labrador and a bunny. Nowadays, 10 years later, they are firm friends. I'm sure you'll agree this is an amazing story, and it is. Coincidences are fundamentally interesting to us. Told with microscopic focus, they can really engage us as a story. The facts that don't support these coincidences are ignored or downplayed in an effort to create a pattern of recognition. The importance of pattern recognition is fundamental for us humans, because what our brain does is seeks to create a pattern that we can recognise and respond to. And each time a pattern is recognised, a little explosion happens in our brain, and an amount of dopamine is released. And this is a chemical trigger that really produces a sense of reward and pleasure. So every time that we find something that we recognise as a pattern, we get a little burst. It becomes kind of interesting. And as readers and as listeners and as people engage with a story, we're being pulled further and further into each story with each new revelation. So as we start to put the pieces together, we go, ooh, fantastic. The connections and revelations that are being made are specifically relevant to social media. So in a world that is brimful of coincidences, happenstance, and other wonderful worlds, social media is the perfect vehicle for storytelling, because it's about not just what you know, it's who you know. It's who's telling you the story, who's passing it along. But what impact does this have on storytelling itself, and how do we create compelling stories for social media? What we do need to remember is that social media is social. There's 4 elements to social media as far as I can sort of see. So I'd normally talk about user-generated content, user-generated filtering, user-generated distribution, but underlying this all, user-generated context. So on one hand, we can produce content, we can produce media, we can produce presentations, we can produce stories, we can produce podcasts, but then that's just one element. We need another element. We need to produce this in a context that other people can consume it. Or we need to filter it. We need to filter what people need to know about a particular topic. And that's exactly what we're doing with Election Wire. And we need to distribute it. So how do we use social media to distribute the content that we're producing, that we're filtering in a specific way, and around which we're creating a context in which people can understand it as part of their lives? So this is where I start to talk about the idea of play. So an interesting thing with kids is that when they are starting to find a friend or create a friendship, they start with not their names, they start with what you like. Do you like playing this? Do you like doing that? Because the affinity is more important than the name. The name can come later. So once you build that affinity, then you start to get a sense of whether you might get along and whether it's something, this is a person you want to be friends with. The same with social media. So if we look at the letters P-L-A-Y, and I've broken these down into particular words, because in terms of storytelling, they give us clues as to how we can create a story that's going to be useful via social media mechanisms. So we start with P for power. Under power, someone knows something that you want to know. They've got something you might want. You might know something that they might like to share in. So the P for power is, how do we demand attention? How do we test limits or boundaries? How do we focus attention on behaviour? How do we control the uncontrollable, and where do we belong? That's power. So by creating your story around a notion of power, understand who has it, who wants it, and where it will take you to. The next one is L for learnings and curiosity. So we're all very interested in something. Finding what that something is important. This is where negotiation comes in. When you're looking at a story, you look for the learnings that you can share, the learnings that someone else may have, and you need to contextualize that in a way that's going to bring that story to life. A is for adventure, exploring an ever-changing world and making this world a better place. There's a real interest in storytelling around adventure. So with the Laura Buxton story, how did this unfold? What was the adventure that took place? What happened when they met? What happened when their parents met? What happened in the meantime? All those things are about the adventure aspect of things. And then finally, we say why for the yelp of surprise and delight. Because what we want to do is we want to delight people. We want to surprise them. We want to give them some recognition and reward for what they're going through. They're participants in the story, so what can we do? And how can we phrase it in a way that's going to be useful to them and make them understand that this is a really important story and one that they want to share. So that's play, P-L-A-Y. What it's really about is creating connections and coincidences that lead to a connection between people. So we want to give people a reason to connect emotionally. We want to find ways for them to engage and share and pass on, but then also to recontextualize that emotional content. So when you're creating a story, you don't just look for the power, you look for the emotion. You don't just look for the learning, you look for the curiosity. You don't look just for the adventure, but you look also for the yelp of surprise and delight. And what you're ultimately looking to do is find something that you can share with the players in your personal playground. So it's thinking about what made things cool for you will make it cool for someone else. What makes it interesting for you makes it interesting for someone else. And in doing so, in leading that direction, what you'll find is that you're creating a story that's not just memorable to yourself, it's actually shareable and becomes viral online through social media because it's worth sharing. And if you do those things, then that's all we can ask. And that's it.